Over the past few years, everything has changed. Where and how we work and live, the way we collaborate and measure success, and the emerging technologies we use to get it all done. Welcome to The Bridge. Join our host, Scott Kinka, in a series of discussions with top leaders in technology and learn about how they bridge their lives and their businesses into our new hybrid work and AI-driven reality. Our hope is that the insights and experiences will help you on your journey in business and in life from who we were to who we are today. And maybe it'll help you get better prepared for whatever comes next. The Bridge is a service of Bridgepoint Technologies, the nation's leading IT advisory firm. Bridgepoint helps business leaders evaluate, procure, implement, and manage technology and customer experience solutions with a focus on realizing sustainable results for your business growth. And now, here's your host, Scott Kinka.
A few nuggets of wisdom for you today, IT leaders. Respect your IT team's normal business hours on most days because there will be plenty of times when you need them to pull an all-nighter. Number 2, unsupported innovation is just future tech debt. Something to think about. Number 3, my personal fave, buying best of breed point solutions generally puts your IT team in the integration business. Something to think about, maybe something we can debate. These are just a few of the nuggets of wisdom that IT leaders can take from my discussion with Pete Eisengrein. He's the Chief Product Officer at Evolve IP and really one of the early innovators in the hosted PBX space nearly 20 years ago. Pete's got a great story around pre-integrated, self-contained user environments for remote work, collaboration, and customer experience. IT leaders, maybe you don't need to be in the integration business. If you enjoy the insights that we deliver from IT visionaries here right to your inbox, please be sure to subscribe, follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. And of course, give us a like, comment, or a rating, as your feedback is essential to us continuing to do the good work that we do here on The Bridge. But for now, without further ado, here's my discussion with Chief Product Officer of Evolve IP, Pete Eisengrein. Well, hello and welcome out to another episode of The Bridge. I'm super excited about this one. We've also fumbled on making this happen a couple of times. So the schedule's worked out today. Here we are. I have on the episode with us this week, Pete Eisengrein, who is the Chief Product Officer at Evolve IP. Pete, how are you this morning?
I'm well. Thanks for having me. I'm glad we finally got this done.
Yeah, exactly. And in full disclosure, I think, first off, Pete, how long have you been at Evolve IP? Something like 7 decades? 16 years? 17 years. God bless you.
Don't shortchange.
And I think we were bantering at the beginning of this call that I think we've known each other for, I don't know, maybe 25?
What year did you start over at
I guess 96, 97. Yeah, so.
Geez. So.
Wait, more than 24, 25. So this will be a fun conversation. We're coming at it from different ends of the spectrum too, which makes it even more fun. Pete's the Chief Product Officer at Evolve IP, but I'll tout you a little bit here, Pete. Truth be told, if you ask me, someone asked me like, who are the 10 guys in the United States who invented VoIP? And I'm sure that's making you blush, and you probably tell me that I'm being ridiculous, but like you're one of them. Pete's one of the longest standing, like hardcore VoIP engineers who really helped commercialize these offerings at the beginning of, in particular, hosted PBX, which eventually became UCaaS. And I'm talking, mid 2000s, early 2000s era at this point. So, Pete, that's amazing. Now you're the Chief Product Officer. I know you're engineering. I know you're a tinkerer, so nobody's going to get you off of command line, but like you're a front of house guy with a C. So, I mean, personally, our producer, Gene, and I were talking on the pre-show. We've actually seen this trend a couple times. We've had some conversations on this. So before we get into tech, I'm just curious, you're a tech guy who's a Chief Product Officer, and I'm seeing this trending. We're seeing this more. Why do you think that is?
It's interesting because I kind of fell into it, right? It wasn't part of the grand plan or anything, but, at Evolve, the product team back towards the end of last year needed some love, right? Yeah. I could see that they needed some direction, and I just sort of started inviting myself to their meetings
Yeah.
and starting to give some direction on, where I saw the market going and where I thought they needed some help. And then that was probably December last year.
Mhm.
And then ultimately in January, started having conversations with our CEO. And then, early February made it official that, okay, I'm in charge of product now.
Yeah.
And I think it's worked out pretty well, right? We've been able to, plan out where we think we need to be and what tactical things need to happen. And we've been getting a lot of stuff accomplished, which is great. Do I see it as a trend? Typically somebody in the role that I had in engineering would normally go towards a CTO role or a CIO role or something like that. And I think that that's still a path, but there's a really natural sort of combination between engineering and product. It makes
Sure.
sense.
Yeah.
And having the experience that I had over on engineering and sort of daily operations, pulling that over into the product side helps because you're able to see it from that perspective, and not just okay, here's the things that we need to do. You've got in the back of your mind all of the stuff that comes along with that. And
Yeah.
so do I think that that will continue as a trend? Maybe, right?
Yeah.
For me, it worked out, and I'm really happy with what I'm doing. I'm enjoying the side of it. It's certainly not any less busy.
Let me ask you this question. I mean, I think sometimes in engineering, and you and I have had some conversations about this just in our own interaction over the years, we've had some developers that would fall into this camp, like just because you can doesn't mean you should. We made you this cool thing last night. Awesome. Thanks. Like, does this role give you some interesting perspective on that? Like the difference between sort of the tech side of organizations and the productization side of organizations as it relates to kind of customer needs, how things are rolled out. Like, tell me a little bit more about that. Because I do think young companies fumble over that problem
Oh yeah.
often. Startups do, like, we're going to make stuff like how I'm seeing it all over in AI right now in particular too, which we'll get into a little bit later. We don't need to unpack that
Yep.
now, but has it given you some fresh perspective on the idea of like really being conscious about turning things on and
Oh,
making cool things
100%.
happen? Yeah.
100%. Because you look at that and you're like, okay, that's great. You when you're small, you're nimble and you create stuff and you don't think about the long term, tech debt that you're building. And that's what it becomes, is this tech debt that nobody really knows anything about. You've got to deal with it down the road at some point.
Yeah.
Versus something that's a little more methodically planned out and just designed and productized, and engineering's involved, and you build out the whole path all the way through, including how am I going to support it, how am I going to sell it, how am I going to do all of these things, what documentation do I have in place. And that's why I think as you get into the larger organizations, and certainly when you talk about like the really big guys, they move at a glacial pace, but when they deliver product, they deliver at 100%, right? There's no partial delivery. The small guys deliver stuff fast, a little messy, and it's really hard to support as you go on.
Yeah.
So, I would say evolve somewhere in between, right? We're fairly nimble. We try and be really process oriented, try and make sure that we've got all the I's dotted and the T's crossed and all of that. But at the same time, you can't lose that nimble, I want to deliver stuff that customers want and not have to take 2 years to do it.
100%. I mean, we could spend an entire time on product development because this is super interesting. But let's get into the meat. Pete, this one's for you, and it's an interesting time to ask you because you've changed your role. But like, what's Pete Eisengrein's superpower as an executive, as an engineer? Like, what of all the things you do, what's the thing you think you do the best?
That's a great question. It's a couple of things. I'm creative by nature, right? So I'm thinking, how do we deliver stuff that's interesting and I can see long term. Now, where I struggle with that is the organizational creating you know, processes. And although I'm really good at that, you know, process
Yeah.
and engineering side of things too, um, but I like to sort of look at the big picture and, you know, distill it down to something. So that's one. The other, I think I'm a people person, although I'm not a great organizational person from,
Yeah.
you know, management person, like a pure manager. I'm not,
Yeah. Yeah.
but anybody that I've worked with generally enjoys working with me, I think.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
you know,
Pete, do you think that struggle? I mean, we're talking about this from the perspective of suppliers, right? Of people who are delivering things to hopefully to the listeners of this podcast. But is there a, you know, the listeners of this podcast are largely IT people themselves. I mean, is there a lesson for them also in this idea of sort of the struggle of creativity and making it? Because I think it's going to be a good use of time, energy, and money, and also just like getting it out there in the wild and having it well documented. And like, is your struggle on the service provider side all that different than kind of the average IT leader needs to think about in terms of rolling out tech in their own organizations?
no, I don't think it's that different. You know, I think the people side of it is really helpful as I've moved into this new role,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm a little more public now, right? I'm in
Yeah.
front of customers more often than I used to be. I'm in front of partners more often than I used to be. You know, I've had to visit several of both. I'm
Yeah.
traveling a little bit more now, and having that ability to be a people person is helping there. As far as, you know, IT leaders and how they deliver, I think there's still something to that, right? And that's why some people, and there's nothing wrong with it, but you know, they put themselves into engineering, and you know, they'd rather be heads down in their head in a computer, whether they're writing code or, you know, configuring routers and firewalls or what their role is. They they tend to, I guess it's more of an introvert versus extrovert, and
Yeah.
I'm somewhere in between.
Yeah.
I'm an extroverted introvert, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Let me be a little bit more controversial than you just were, because I saw you get out of the data center, right? Like,
Yeah,
if you want to solve this problem, you've got to spend some time with your end users, right? Because I mean,
you
on a
do.
regular basis, you know, if we're getting involved, if I'm getting it, if a project's getting to me, like, hey, you know, Scott, we need the kick save from you, like, 9 times out of 10, I would say that there's a communication issue between IT and end users. It's not the technology is broken. It's not that the rollout was poor. It's not that the numbers didn't port. Yes, those things happen, but it's generally more of like the end user are going, "Why did we do this?
Yeah,
This is disruptive to me," right? So, but anyway, super interesting on that one. Just quickly for those who don't know, and we'll certainly reference previous episodes where we've had Evolve IP on here, and we'll talk about one of them in a minute. But can you give me the, hey, we're in an elevator together, Evolve IP story?
sure. You know, we are a cloud services provider. We basically play in three areas, in UCaaS, Unified Communications, in Contact Center, and in the compute side of the house. And when I say compute, we're talking about desktop as a service. We're talking about IaaS, you know, infrastructure, servers, and then also a bunch of the software that you put on that, typically in terms of security. You know, we're uber security focused these days, looking at, you know, how do we round out the things that people need. And this goes back to the conversation we were just having around, you know, talking to your end users. In this case, it might be customers, understanding what they actually want and need, and not delivering stuff because it's cool, but because it actually brings value to their job, right?
Yeah.
To help them and assist them and make their lives easier. So Evolve plays really in those three areas. You know, again, coming from where I came from was on the voice side of things. Obviously, I've been compute adjacent for all these years. I've been a user, not so much a
Yeah.
thinker or tinkerer on the compute side, but now I get to play on that side too.
You know, most of the people that we have on the pod, suppliers who are great in their buckets, they're top right magic, Gartner magic quadrant, they deal with all of that. Like, they're a specialist in one of the things that you just mentioned. You know, what is this a conscious model to deliver differently than them? Like, what,
It is.
who's the right user to buy all that stuff from you, because that's not typically the way we think about technology.
No, and it's not typically the way it gets sold either, because you know, ordinarily when somebody's in a buying cycle for one of those things, they're not necessarily in the buying cycle for all of those things.
Yeah.
Now you will see UC and contact center getting sold pretty often together, not always, but for them to also add compute, or if they're on the compute buying cycle, they're probably not on also on the voice buying cycle. So, we consider that a unicorn, where they
All
don't
of it
tend
was.
to exist where they're buying all of them. In that case, it's more of a land and expand for us, right? Where they bought one thing, and down the road they might buy something else because they like Evolve IP as a vendor. But in terms of the strategy to get here, yes, that's always been sort of the plan when we started, as you know. We started with Evolve, we started with voice, hosted PBX, right? We got into call center, which was kind of a light version of what contact center is today. But there was always the design, the business plan to be in multiple buckets like that. And part of that is, you don't have all your eggs in one basket, but also it's about customer value and, trying to distinguish yourself. While you may not have all of the bells and whistles of some of your competitors who are like in the Magic Quadrant on each of those things, to find one vendor that you can rely on, call for support, and have one person to contact for all of those things is kind of unique. And it was part of the design.
I mean, I think sometimes, this sort of buying, maybe best of breed's not the right answer, because I know that you guys have the right phrase, because I know that you guys are, and you have your own rankings in Gartner and all that in various categories that you're in. But like, let's take the macro level concept of like buying best of breed versus sort of buying it with a services layer and integrated. It's like, in this mode, you're chasing feature. In this mode, you just got put in the integration business, right? Which is kind of interesting. I can go buy all these things. I gotta make them work well together. It brings up an interesting fact. So when we had an episode, I guess it was about a year ago, with Kevin Sullivan, who is, on the Evolve IP team, a fantastic
He reports to me now, by the way.
Awesome. Right. Love the guy. We spent almost the entire time talking about DAS at the time. And I think it was because we were sort of having a conversation around what we're settling back to post-COVID and, mobile workforces and things of that nature. You've talked a little bit about the other businesses that Evolves in. Is DAS still a core practice for you? It's kind of a multi-part question. What are the real use cases of it in your world, and kind of what makes it so hard to do? Why don't we see, a lot more of it on the DAS side?
It's a great question. And yeah, Kevin is brilliant, right? And he's so good at talking about this. He's so much better than I am at talking about this. But at the end of the day, we look at DAS not as a security solution, but as a security enabler, because what it's doing for the end customer is being able to manage things centrally, as opposed to having to manage, especially now in the post-COVID world where so many people are working remotely. You don't have to manage all of these devices out in the world. You're now managing everything in the center, and you can create really consistent rules and security policies and everything that covers all of your stuff. And at the same time, making sure that, if a laptop or something gets stolen, the thing that gets you into the DAS, if it gets stolen, lost, whatever, you're not having a bunch of content locally on the machine that could potentially be very disruptive to your business.
Yeah.
So, being able to do that, it simplifies the IT leader's role in terms of standing up new servers, desktops, whatever, because you've got templates that you can just spawn off copies of it. So there's no longer that same lag time and all of the effort that goes into onboarding a new person, right? I hired somebody. Typically in the old world, you'd buy a laptop or a desktop, and then you'd have to install the software on it. And then you'd have to, in this case, deliver it to wherever they work, since they're probably not in an office anymore, or maybe they are. But in the DAS world, it's simple, right?
Yeah.
We've taken what used to take 2 weeks to build it out, procure it, build it, ship it, and then support it. And now, within an hour, 2 hours,
Yeah.
right? Somebody's spawned off a desktop that has everything that they need. So
I chuckled in the middle of that, Pete. This is an inside joke that nobody will get, but you said 2 weeks. So it just makes me think of somebody we know. 2 weeks, I have this for you. God love him. Whole other issue. It. So look, all that sounds compelling about DAS, and I don't want to spend
yeah.
our whole time dwelling there. But why aren't more people doing it then? Like, what's the Achilles heel, at least in most offerings out there around
Well,
DAS?
probably for us, and one of the things that makes us different is the fact that we've mastered how to do audio on
Yeah.
it. And I think that's one of the things that differentiates us in where we do have competitors in the DAS
Right.
market, and they're very good competitors. But because we're also a voice company, right? We've got expertise there, and being able to do both of those is a little bit unique. Now, why doesn't DAS take off more? I think part of it is just momentum. People are used to buying in a certain way,
Yeah.
and when they need hardware and they've got somebody that they got to hire, they know that they call their VAR and they buy the gear and they
Mm.
do this and they do that. And what we're trying to do is talk about the value. Now, it also swings from a capex model to a monthly recurring model, and so
I
it's a
was
different.
completely thinking that. Yeah, I mean, like if you think about all of the capital gear that the business has bought, probably the largest one that's in a depreciation schedule are end devices or edge devices. Like servers are hard enough to go like, I got to get off the drip on my, depreciation and eventually I'm going to turn that to capex, but like you're always constantly in a desktop replacement cycle. So like when can you draw a line and move that to opex, is tough, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But the people that do adopt it, you know, there's no going back. Why would
Yeah,
you?
yeah,
Especially,
totally.
like I said, when you start talking about security enablement and being able to manage the things that attach to it, becomes so much easier. And as an example, you know, we already talked about like the desktop and, what files you might have that are sensitive that are sitting on the desktop. Well, again, let's take it the other direction. Instead of hiring, if somebody's terminated, being able to shut that off and make sure that you
Yeah.
don't have to get the gear back, because either they're using their personal gear or you gave them, some sort of cheapo desktop or however they're accessing the DAS. Being able to disable that right away and make sure that they're not taking any of that with them. Also equally important.
Yeah.
There's so many reasons to talk about it, but
Yeah, we could. So here we are. We're 20 minutes in, and I pumped you up as somebody who's on the Mount Rushmore of hosted PBX, and we haven't talked about about communications at all. Let me swing it. Let me swing it that way. By the way, that's not just me. You can ask folks from Cisco who would say that. So let me just be very clear.
I'm blushing a
Um,
little bit, and it is ridiculous.
um, you so you mentioned the hard part about audio. So let's use that. Inside of desk. Let's use that as a swing. You guys are voice specialists. You mentioned that. And years ago made the swing to focusing on leveraging productivity applications as the front end. And Teams was a big driver. Thankfully, you guys were already there when COVID happened, right?
Yeah,
We'll take that as log. But I mean, listen, Zoom blew up during the pandemic. WebEx is back to making a push, and I know you guys are a big WebEx provider. Just talk to me a little bit about just the state of UC in general. I mean, it used to be about the buttons that every service provider themselves had. And now, largely speaking, people have multiple platforms. They're trying to figure out what their long-term strategy is. What is it that you're seeing out there in general?
yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of what the service providers in the VoIP space are dealing with. Used to be about the features and functionality of the PBX. And today, that's really just an enabler to the UC platform, whether it's Teams or WebEx or whatever you're using.
Yeah.
Zoom became a verb because of all
Yeah.
this. And the interesting thing is, most people that we're bringing on today, nearly 100% of them are buying in the collab space, right? And in the US, it's almost all Teams. In Europe,
Yeah.
we're seeing it's mostly Cisco WebEx,
Wow.
which is just an interesting thing. I can't say why. It's a different take there.
Yeah.
But where do I think it goes from here? Again, the telephony side of it doesn't go away anytime soon. Now, interestingly, if you could get Microsoft and Cisco and Zoom and maybe some others to collude a little bit, the PSTN becomes unnecessary. Because if I could
Yeah, they were
call,
interrupts, right? Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, you wouldn't need to have a DID.
right. But
Yeah.
the interesting thing that we saw, as we continue to grow, our usage on the PSTN side actually went way down as everybody went home, right?
Yeah.
Because they're now using their collab system to have their daily conversations. I rarely have a conversation with somebody external unless, taking a sales call.
Yeah.
But, even the calls that I'm having with customers and partners and everything else, it's usually on Teams. So there's no PSTN involved.
Yeah.
And so like the feature functionality where that plays, I think still has value the way we deliver that, because again, our PBX is connected to the outside world and it's connecting to the collab side of the house. And what that means is if, for instance, Microsoft is having a bad day, and luckily that doesn't happen that often, but when it does, we've got abilities for the users to be able to, redirect their calls from, call forwarding or however they want to do it. And you can prescribe that, or you can do it in a responsive mode. But that's part of it. The other thing that we've done, and I mentioned our contact center, which is one of the few pieces of our IP that we own, is we truly integrated it. So whereas an over-the-top PBX and contact center deployment, the contact center has no notion if I pick up my handset and place a call to, order my lunch.
Yeah.
Whereas we've done that so that the contact center and the PBX are really tightly integrated and they know the state. So I'm not going to deliver a call to an agent that's already on another call that may be outside the contact center.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. So this idea that the reliance on the PBX has waned because people are collabing in their platform of choice, as you mentioned, largely Teams in the US, at least from your experience, also changes the idea that somebody's available, because it's not, that is generally not seen in the telephony solution, right? If they're on a Teams call or they've stepped away for lunch or what have you. Okay, that's super interesting. First off, another inside joke, but this is a funny one. Is it finally the year of video, Pete? So, let me let everybody in on the joke. So, Pete, in that history of Pete and I working together, I was running product as a chief technology officer and chief product officer, and Pete was running engineering. And every year I'm prepping him, like, when it was not easy to do and it wasn't built into these platforms, I'm like, Pete, we got to get ready. This is the year of video. It was 2010, right? So it finally happened a decade later in 2020. Here we are. Back to the Future actually occurred, right? But let me get back to the conversation though about dial tone. If we're communicating most of the time within the collab platforms, then why doesn't an end user just use Microsoft calling plans if all they need is the occasional phone number?
Yeah, well, again, one would be if you want to integrate it to contact center or something like that. But probably more importantly is if you want to integrate with others within an organization that maybe don't have collab. As an example, maybe only your knowledge workers have Teams. Or maybe most people do, but then your conference rooms don't, and you want to still be able to integrate the conversation between those. Now, I know that Microsoft also rolled out a gateway product that you can do some of that, but it's just an overall better experience if we're able to treat it all like one organization. And your Teams to Teams calls still run over Microsoft, but your Teams to PBX can come through us, and we can manage that better.
No, that makes sense. And I would also imagine, I don't know if you can talk about this. I mean, I know of a customer of yours that has big facilities where there are just lots of phones and knowledge workers. That's another potential use case there, right? Sort of the phone on the wall at the.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And there's still plenty of people that want both.
Yeah.
And particularly when you start getting into exec level, right? They want their handset because that's just how they work. Or maybe they've got an assistant and the phone rings both of them. We can do all of that and bring their collab at the same time, so that we're able to do all of those things together. It's a pretty interesting mix.
So I think, we could, again, that's another conversation we could drain for another 40 minutes. And I'm gonna bring up the two initials that everybody is talking about right now, and just ask you a little bit about AI. And I want to get into some personal questions, and we're running on time. So I'll just say, on the AI side, let me ask a top level question. Are we doing the same thing with the term AI that we did with the term cloud 10 years ago?
Um, yeah, to a degree, right? Everybody wants to go out and buy AI, and they don't really know what that means. And there's so much to it around security and making sure that you're not leaking private information out to the world. It's something that we are using in house, and in fact, we are in the process of working on some of this on the contact center now. Competitors would look at that and say, you guys are way behind.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But the reality is, people still don't really know how to use it. And I just had this conversation with a customer who is in banking, and they wanted to understand, okay, what's that mean? Are you guys using a public AI in order to do this? I'm like, well, hold on. If you wanted to do AI in your contact center, I'm talking about like a virtual agent, something that answers the call, natural language, tell me why you're calling today, and being able to deal with that call. In our world, public AI works really well in that, assuming that the data is good that it can gather. But being able to look at that and say, okay, I'm going to route the call based on the things that I know about this company. All right, that's fine. I can do that. But when it starts getting into, banking, the first thing I said to them is, if you guys want to use AI in that world, I want you to run the AI and give me an interface to connect to it, right?
Yeah.
Give me an API to talk to it.
Yeah.
And we will do that. What I don't want is your data, your bank data in my
Of course.
base. Absolutely not, right? And I don't want access to it.
Yeah.
So, how do you deal with AI? And again, that's on the security side, but there's so much hype around it, and we're equally guilty, right? Because you want to be able to have a story. And some of that for us is in the collab space, right? And how Copilot integrates to Teams, and what WebEx is doing with AI, and it's all really cool stuff. I use it regularly. I've begun writing about it more on LinkedIn. We're doing more with call recording, and being able to not just be able to do transcriptions, but be able to really understand sentiment and the overall context of a conversation, and how that's important, and be able to do interesting things with that. So a lot of it's still hype. In fact, I was just looking at Gartner's hype cycle on AI, and some of it's relevant, some of it's long way off. It's happening at such a quick pace, though, that yes, there's a lot of hype, like cloud was hype. But we either have to make some decisions on how we're going to deal with it sooner than later, or else we're just going to fall behind. And that's true for everybody. That's not just as
governance is an issue. Companies not having is a massive issue. I think that's been something that I've been talking quite a bit about. I have a couple public sessions coming up around just governance in general, and understanding that, running your own large language models versus leveraging public ones. Like we could be on this one forever. I think the thing that always cracks me up about it in the CX world, and you mentioned it, like in contact center, wanting to have a bot engaging in conversations, it's got to learn from something.
Yes.
Like I regularly will have customers think that they can paper over a crappy process by turning a bot on. And I'm like, well, listen, if there's no process for the bot to learn, then it's not going to help you. Like, it can make inferences, but you're going to have a 30 or 40% false positive rate. Like, how organized are you? Like, how would you train your next agent, your next live agent? And that's the kind of the way you got to think about training your next artificial agent. Like, if it's not someplace, I don't know, how you're going to get a dependable outcome, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's interesting, because you've seen articles out there. I think it was an airline in Canada, maybe, that had this issue where somebody was working with a chatbot, and it gave away something based on a procedure that didn't exist, right? Because one didn't exist, that wasn't explicit. The bot made it up, based on what it knew.
Wow, we're going to have another episode, Pete, because we just had 3 conversations that could all go for another half hour. We're going to lightning round finish this. All right. These are just some fun questions. Let's just fire through this. First one, I need a shameless prediction. Be Nostradamus. For the next 12 to 18 months, can be in tech, but it could be in sports or politics or whatever. What's going to happen so we can look back at this in a year and see if you were right?
All right. I'm going to stay on the AI theme.
Okay,
I'm going to say there is going to be, and I'm not even going to call it a breach. I'm going to call it a leak. There's going to be a leak of data that is going to be massive.
Okay.
Don't know who, don't know where, but it's coming.
And that really goes to that governance conversation you were talking about. Like if companies don't figure out what their policy is going to be going forward with their employees, then, this is probably the biggest shadow IT risk we've had ever, frankly, at the end 100%. Of the day. Okay, super interesting. Next one. Who's going to win the Super Bowl, World Series, NBA championship? We can't say, and Stanley Cup. Pick one and make a prediction. Go for it.
We'll go World Series.
Okay.
I think it's the Phils this year, man.
Listen, I would love it. I'll be out there on the greased up poles with you if we do that. So I'd love that one. We don't need to drain that. Just look at the standings right now and we'll see what's happening. All right. I'm going to ask you a funny question and then kind of like a business leadership question. So here's the funny question. I asked this to a lot of our guests. I like to compare the answers, but the next apocalyptic thing happens. You can pick whatever movie is your favorite. It could be, The Matrix or I Am Legend or something, but whatever. Life changes dramatically. Only one app works on your phone. Which one is it?
All right. I've prepared for this question.
Okay. All right. You've done your homework and watched previous episodes. So, okay.
I've got 2,
right,
but I know I can only get 1. But I'm going to give you what the runner-up is. The runner-up is Shazam. Shazam is the thing that made me fall in love with smartphones in the first place. I was blown away by it, and I'm still blown away by it.
Okay.
But the real one is it's this little app called What a Color. And I'll tell you why, because in my personal life, I'm a painter and I use this thing. You basically can, like on Photoshop where there's a little eyedropper where you hit it, color out of an image. It does the same thing. And then I can blow up the color a little bit. And if I'm trying to paint something from an image, it helps me
get the colors. Okay. And so your expectation of this apocalyptic event is you're not going to need access to the internet because nothing's going on. You're like in your cave with some paints that you're mixing up from natural stuff that's growing outside. And you're like, I just need to match colors. So, I love that one. When this happens, Pete is totally off the grid, y'all. All right. Last one. Now, I got a bunch of business questions in here. I'm going to pick one for fun. I'm going to look at my list here. All right. I need advice for IT leaders, right? That you wish you knew when you were a first-time manager.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I didn't prepare you for this one, so you can take a second. I'll hum in the meantime.
Yeah. All right. So here's one of the things. As a leader of an IT group, it's really important that you honor their typical business day and not like bug them constantly after hours. And the reason being is there are going to be moments where you're going to need them round the clock for like 72 hours. Yeah. Something's going to happen and you're going to need them. And you want to make sure that when that happens, they're going to answer the call, right? Because they realize that, all right, this is really important and I got to deal with it. But you don't want them so burnt out that they're constantly under fire like that. So you got to make sure that you're honoring, and it doesn't mean that, none of us work 40 hours in IT. But you got to have some boundaries around it. And, when things are normal, make them normal so that when things are really urgent, they're urgent and everybody's willing to respond.
Pete, that sounds like a quotable right there. Note to Gene, who's watching the episode here from the production suite. I really like that one. Pete, this has been the absolute, I promise you it's going to be the high point of my day, and it's still early in the morning. So this was awesome, man. Thank you so much for the time. I'm glad to hear things are going awesome. And I hope that our listeners found this as entertaining as I did. Thanks for joining us here on The Bridge, Pete.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun.
You got it.
See ya.
Listen, If you made it this far, there must have been some good content, or you're just a fan or a relative of mine. In either case, we appreciate you spending your most valuable asset with us, your time. We don't take that lightly. We'd also like to say one more time that we're appreciative of Bridgepoint Technologies and their belief and sponsorship of this show. We hope that if you or someone you know is thinking about your company's digital transformation, or simply the next IT project that you may not have the resources, budget, or time to get to, I'm sure that Bridgepoint, one of the country's fastest growing technology advisory and procurement firms, can help. Check out bridgepointtechnologies.com. Don't forget the E on Bridgepoint, or simply reach out to me at Skinka, SKINKA, at bpt3.net. Also take a minute, please, if you would, to give us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. It helps give us the visibility to reach other people like you. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bridge. I'm Scott Kinka, and until next time, there's a lot of noise out there in business and in life. Do what you can to be the signal. Thanks.